In the book of Daniel, imagine a scenario of pure chaos. A besieged city, the spiritual heart of a people in ruins, and sacred treasures being taken to adorn temples of foreign gods. This is the backdrop of the third year of Jehoiakim's reign, when Nebuchadnezzar, the feared king of Babylon, launched a brutal siege on Jerusalem. But what many don't know is that this story is not just about the fall of a city. It's about a cosmic dispute between celestial powers. The temple utensils of God, objects of worship and reverence, were taken and placed in the temple of Babylonian gods. This was not just a political or military defeat, nor merely an attempt to prove that the God of Israel had been vanquished, but had God truly lost? Or was he orchestrating something much greater? In this video, we will uncover why God allowed this to happen. The answer may surprise you, and you will only understand it fully by watching until the end. Imagine Babylon, an imposing city adorned with gleaming temples, hanging gardens, and streets bustling with life. For any young person, being chosen to live in the king's palace would be the highest honor. However, for Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, this honor came at a cost, abandoning their roots, their customs, and above all, their faithfulness to the God of Israel. When Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, he wasn't content with just taking the temple's treasures. He wanted the brightest minds of Israel. Youths without physical defect, handsome, endowed with wisdom, knowledge, and discernment. These were the king's requirements to form an elite group to serve the empire. But for Daniel and his friends, this selection was a much deeper test than any Babylonian training. Nebuchadnezzar's order was clear. These youths were to be educated in the culture and language of the Chaldeans. They were given new names, a symbolic act meant to erase their Hebrew identity and fully integrate them into the Babylonian system. Daniel was renamed Belteshazzar, Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was renamed Abednego. This name change wasn't just administrative, it was an attempt to sever their ties to their faith and history. But the most subtle and dangerous challenge came at the king's table. Imagine the splendor of the meals in the Babylonian palace. Succulent meats, aged wines, and sophisticated dishes. However, there was a problem beyond mere appetite. Many of these foods were offered as sacrifices to Babylonian gods before being served. For Daniel and his friends, eating such foods was more than a dietary issue. It was a spiritual betrayal. Daniel, recognizing the dilemma, decided not to defile himself with the king's food. He asked the chief eunuch for permission to follow a different diet: vegetables and water. A simple choice at first glance, but one that carried profound implications of courage and faithfulness. Refusing the king's food could be seen as disobedience, a direct affront to Nebuchadnezzar's power. However, Daniel chose to trust God, even knowing that his decision could cost him his life. He proposed a 10-day test. He and his friends would follow their diet, while the other youths consumed the luxurious dishes from the royal table. At the end of the period, their health would be compared. Here's the fascinating detail. This proposal was an act of faith. Daniel knew that God would honor his choice. For him, maintaining spiritual integrity was more important than any physical or political benefit the king's table could offer. 10 days passed, and the result was undeniable. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were healthier and more vigorous than all the other youths. But the impact of this decision went beyond the physical. God granted these 4 young men exceptional wisdom, understanding in all kinds of literature and knowledge, and to Daniel specifically, the ability to interpret visions and dreams, a gift that would become crucial in the years to come. This moment was a milestone. It was a clear demonstration that faithfulness to God yields results that transcend human limitations. At the heart of the greatest empire of the time, these Hebrew youths proved that obedience to the true God could surpass even the expectations of the most powerful king. There is often an overlooked detail in this story: the role of the chief eunuch. He risked his position and possibly his life by allowing Daniel and his friends to follow their diet. This shows that God not only honored the faithfulness of the youths, but also moved the hearts of influential people to make way for them. Another fascinating point is the cultural impact of this decision. While other young Israelites may have succumbed to assimilation, Daniel and his friends remained faithful, creating a clear boundary between their identity and the oppressive Babylonian culture. This faithfulness would become a living testimony for all future generations, showing that it is possible to live in a hostile world without compromising spiritual values. Did you know that the 10-day test parallels one of the earliest chapters of the Bible? In the book of Genesis, when God created man, he provided a plant-based diet, Genesis 1:29. While this doesn't mean everyone must follow a vegetarian diet, the episode with Daniel can be seen as a reminder that God uses even the simplest choices to reveal his glory. One night, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that left him restless. Determined to understand its meaning, he summoned all the wise men of Babylon. However, there was a condition. They not only had to interpret the dream, but also describe it without the king revealing it. For Nebuchadnezzar, this would ensure the interpretation was genuine, but for the wise men, it seemed like an impossible task. How could anyone describe a dream they hadn't dreamed? When none of the king's counselors could fulfill the task, Nebuchadnezzar ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon, including Daniel and his friends. It was at this moment that Daniel stood out. He asked the king for time and turned to what he always did: prayer. Daniel and his friends sought God fervently, and during the night the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Daniel's response was neither arrogance nor boasting. He began by acknowledging that wisdom comes from God. He was brought before Nebuchadnezzar and, with boldness and humility, declared, "There is no man on earth who can reveal what the king demands, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." Daniel described the dream in detail: a great statue composed of different materials, the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet partly of iron and partly of clay. He explained that the statue represented a succession of kingdoms. The head of gold was Babylon itself, and the other materials symbolized empires that would come afterward, each less glorious but stronger in certain ways. Finally, a stone, not cut by human hands, struck the statue, destroying it completely and becoming a great mountain that filled the entire earth. This stone represented the eternal kingdom of God. Imagine the impact of this revelation on Nebuchadnezzar. A young captive belonging to a conquered people was proclaiming that the kingdom of the most powerful king on earth was merely temporary. Yet, instead of taking offense, Nebuchadnezzar recognized the wisdom and truth in Daniel's words. He fell before him and declared, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings." As a reward, Daniel was elevated to a position of high authority in the empire. He also secured the promotion of his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, to important roles. But the most remarkable aspect of this event was how it marked the entry of the God of Israel into the heart of Babylon, challenging the pagan gods and demonstrating that true power belongs to one God. What many fail to perceive in this story is Daniel's audacity in confronting Nebuchadnezzar's vision of greatness. The king believed his kingdom was eternal, but Daniel revealed that it was part of a greater plan culminating in God's eternal kingdom. It is astonishing how a young captive, seemingly powerless and without influence, was used to confront a king with divine truth. This boldness was only possible because Daniel fully trusted in God. Another fascinating detail is the symbolism of the stone that destroyed the statue. Many scholars view this stone as a prophecy of the coming of Christ and the establishment of a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Thus, the story is not merely about politics or power, it is a timeless message about the sovereignty of God. After Daniel interpreted the dream, Nebuchadnezzar decided to build a colossal golden statue, likely inspired by the head of gold representing his kingdom. The statue was erected on the plain of Dura, and a decree was issued. At the sound of musical instruments, everyone was to bow down and worship the image. Anyone who disobeyed would be mercilessly thrown into a blazing furnace. For Nebuchadnezzar, this was more than an act of worship. It was a demonstration of power and absolute control. He wanted everyone to acknowledge his divine authority, consolidating his position as the supreme ruler. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah refused to bow before the statue. Imagine the scene. Thousands of people, from high-ranking officials to common citizens, kneeling before the statue, while these three young men stood tall, defying the royal decree. They knew what was at stake, but their faith was unwavering. When Nebuchadnezzar learned of their defiance, he was furious. He gave them one last chance to comply, but their response was one of remarkable conviction. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. These words reveal a faith that transcends circumstances. They not only believed in God's power to save them, but were also willing to face death if that was not his will. The young men's refusal was a direct insult to Nebuchadnezzar. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. The heat was so intense that the soldiers who threw the young men into the fire died instantly. However, what was meant to be a brutal execution turned into a divine spectacle. When Nebuchadnezzar looked into the furnace, he was astonished. He asked his counselors, "Were there not 3 men we tied up and threw into the fire?" They confirmed. Then he declared, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Who was the 4th man? For many, it is a divine appearance, perhaps a manifestation of Jesus himself, protecting the young men in the fire. What is clear is that God's presence was with them, turning what should have been a scene of destruction into a miraculous display of his power. Nebuchadnezzar, witnessing this miracle, called the young men out of the furnace. They emerged unharmed. Their clothes did not even smell of smoke. The king, deeply impressed, declared that no other god could save in the way the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had. He issued a new decree, exalting the God of Israel and forbidding any blasphemy against him. The 3 young men were promoted to even higher positions in Babylon, but most importantly, their faith served as a powerful testimony. In a moment of crisis, they demonstrated that God is capable of saving, but true worship of him does not depend on circumstances or expected outcomes. Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful king on earth, was living in a time of peace and prosperity. Babylon was at the height of its glory, with its massive walls, the famed hanging gardens, and an aura of invincibility. Yet, in the midst of this stability, the king had a dream that deeply unsettled him. He saw a majestic tree that reached the heavens. Its canopy was so vast that it provided shelter to animals and birds. Its beauty was unparalleled, and its fruits fed all living creatures. It was a vision of abundance and power. However, suddenly a celestial messenger, a sort of watcher, descended and ordered the tree to be cut down. Its leaves were stripped, its fruits scattered, and the animals fled. Only the stump and roots were left, bound with iron and bronze chains to the ground. In the dream, the messenger proclaimed that the mind of a man would be changed to that of an animal for 7 times, until he acknowledged that the Most High rules over human kingdoms and gives power to whomever he wills. When Nebuchadnezzar's magicians, astrologers, and wise men failed to interpret the dream, Daniel was summoned. He listened attentively to the king's account and immediately understood its meaning. However, instead of delivering a swift response, Daniel was alarmed. He knew the message was severe and would be hard for the king to accept. With respect and courage, Daniel explained that the great tree represented Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. Like the tree, the king had grown in power and influence, becoming a central figure in the world. His reign was prosperous, and his authority reached every corner of the empire. However, his arrogance and failure to recognize the true God had brought about divine judgment. Daniel revealed that the dream was a warning. Nebuchadnezzar would be removed from his position and live like an animal, eating grass and dwelling in the open. This would happen so that he would understand that God is sovereign and that all human power is merely a reflection of divine will. Yet Daniel also delivered a message of hope. The stump and roots left intact symbolized that the king's kingdom would be restored once he acknowledged God's sovereignty. Daniel then urged the king to repent, abandon his sins, and show mercy to the poor, believing this could delay or even prevent the dream's fulfillment. Despite Daniel's clear warning, Nebuchadnezzar persisted in his arrogance. A year later, while walking on the terrace of his palace, he looked over the magnificent city of Babylon and declared, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" These words sealed his fate. Before he even finished speaking, a heavenly voice announced that the judgment had come. Nebuchadnezzar immediately lost his sanity. He was removed from the throne and his life drastically changed. The man who had ruled the greatest empire on earth now lived like an animal, eating grass, sleeping outdoors, and entirely disconnected from his humanity. His hair grew like eagle feathers and his nails like bird claws. This extreme humiliation was the fulfillment of the dream. The king, who had relied on his own strength and glory, was reduced to complete dependence on God. For 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar lived in this condition. These years were not just punishment, they were a period of learning. During this time, he had no control over his life or kingdom. Everything he had built and achieved seemed insignificant in the face of his new reality. Yet, this period of humiliation was also an opportunity for transformation. At the end of the period, Nebuchadnezzar raised his eyes to heaven. This simple yet symbolic gesture marked the moment of his restoration. He acknowledged that the Most High rules over human kingdoms and that all power is a divine gift. His words, recorded in the Bible, testify to his transformation. "I raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever." By recognizing God's sovereignty, Nebuchadnezzar was restored to his throne. However, he was no longer the same man. His experience of humiliation taught him about the fragility of human power and the necessity of depending on God. He publicly declared that Daniel's God was the only one worthy of praise, affirming, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble." Years passed, and one night in Babylon, a scene of opulence unfolded. King Belshazzar, ruling in place of his absent father Nabonidus, hosted a grand banquet. The city, renowned for its impregnable walls and reputation for invincibility, seemed untouchable even with the Persian army encamped at its gates. In the banquet hall, wine flowed freely, and the tables were laden with luxurious delicacies. 1,000 nobles, along with their wives and concubines, toasted Babylon's greatness and the gods they believed protected their city. It was a celebration of power, wealth, and, above all, the arrogance of a king who believed himself above any threat. But Belshazzar was not content with mere displays of wealth. In an act that defied the sacred, he ordered the gold and silver vessels from the temple of God in Jerusalem to be brought in. These items, captured by Nebuchadnezzar decades earlier, were consecrated to the service of the God of Israel. By using them to toast pagan gods, Belshazzar not only desecrated the sacred, but also directly challenged the Lord. This act of irreverence was a breaking point. It was not merely an expression of arrogance, but a direct affront to the Almighty God. The king was unaware that his feast was about to become a scene of divine judgment. As the revelry continued with laughter, music, and indulgence, something extraordinary occurred. A mysterious hand appeared in midair, visible to all, and began writing on the plaster wall of the palace. The words, traced by invisible fingers, glowed in the lamplight, creating a terrifying spectacle. Imagine the reaction. Laughter ceased instantly, and a deathly silence fell over the hall. Belshazzar, moments earlier brimming with confidence, turned as pale as wax. His knees trembled, and he could barely stand. No one understood what was happening, but everyone knew it was something supernatural. The inscription read, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. These Aramaic words carried a somber meaning, but none of the king's wise men, magicians, or astrologers could interpret them. Chaos erupted in the hall as the desperate king promised wealth and power to anyone who could decipher the message. Yet no one had the answer. Finally, someone remembered Daniel, the prophet who had interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. He was urgently summoned to the banquet hall. When Daniel entered, he saw the fear on Belshazzar's face and the writing on the wall. Unlike the others, Daniel was unimpressed by the promise of rewards or titles. He knew the message came from God, and his responsibility was to declare the truth, not flatter the king. Daniel began with a stern reminder. He recounted God's actions in Nebuchadnezzar's life, highlighting how the former king was humbled and restored after acknowledging divine sovereignty. Daniel accused Belshazzar of failing to learn from this example. Despite knowing what had happened to Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar had chosen to act arrogantly and disrespectfully, profaning sacred vessels and glorifying gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which have no power. Then Daniel interpreted the writing. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Parsin, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The message was clear and irrevocable. God had judged Belshazzar, and the verdict was condemnation. Unlike Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar would not be given a second chance. His time was up, and Babylon would fall that very night. As Daniel declared God's judgment, the Persian army was already in motion. Under Cyrus, the Persians had diverted the Euphrates River, which ran through Babylon. With the water level lowered, they entered the city through the dry riverbed, bypassing the seemingly impregnable walls. The security of Babylon, in which Belshazzar had placed so much trust, became its greatest weakness. That very night, Belshazzar was killed, and the Babylonian Empire fell. The transition of power was so swift and efficient that many Babylonians only learned of the event the next day. The empire that Nebuchadnezzar had built, the greatest in the known world, was handed over to the Medes and Persians as foretold by God. The fall of Babylon was a landmark event in world history and the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Daniel, now an elderly and respected man, became one of the 3 top administrators of the Medo-Persian Empire under Darius. His exceptional competence and integrity impressed Darius, who planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. This provoked envy among other leaders and satraps who could not tolerate the idea of a foreigner, especially a Hebrew captive, holding such a high position. Determined to bring Daniel down, they scrutinized every aspect of his public and private life. However, Daniel was blameless, his conduct was exemplary, and there were no faults in his work or morality. Frustrated, the conspirators decided that the only way to accuse him was to target his faithfulness to God. They devised a cunning plan. They persuaded King Darius to issue a decree prohibiting anyone from making petitions or prayers to any god or man except the king for 30 days. The penalty for breaking this law was being thrown into the lion's den. Appealing to Darius's ego, the conspirators convinced him to sign the decree, making it irrevocable under the laws of the Medes and Persians. Behind their apparent loyalty to Darius was a cruel plot. They knew Daniel would never compromise his devotion to the God of Israel. The decree was a trap specifically designed to destroy him. When Daniel learned of the decree, he did not react with despair or anger, nor did he attempt to hide his prayer practice. Instead, he did what he always did. He went home, opened the windows facing Jerusalem, and prayed to God 3 times a day. His courage was undeniable. Daniel knew that his obedience to God could cost him his life, but his faithfulness outweighed his fear. Daniel's prayer was an expression of his trust in God, even in the face of death. He did not ask to be spared, but continued his routine of praising, thanking, and interceding. His spiritual life was a non-negotiable priority, and he was willing to face the consequences. The conspirators, closely watching, did not take long to act. They caught Daniel red-handed and rushed to report him to the king. It was the moment they had been waiting for to execute their plan. When Darius learned of the accusation against Daniel, he was deeply distressed. He liked and respected Daniel and tried in every way to find a loophole to save him. But the laws of the Medes and Persians were inflexible. Not even the king could revoke a signed decree. Reluctantly, Darius ordered Daniel to be thrown into the lion's den. Before executing the sentence, Darius, hopeful, said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." The den was an enclosed space full of hungry lions. When Daniel was thrown there, a stone was placed over the entrance and sealed with the king's and nobles' signet rings, ensuring that no one could interfere. That night was anguishing, but not for Daniel. While he was in the den, protected by divine power, Darius endured a night of torment. He could not eat, sleep, or entertain himself. His heart was heavy, hoping for a miracle. At dawn, Darius ran to the lion's den. Full of anxiety, he cried out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel's response echoed as a testimony of faith and power. "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the lions' mouths. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." Daniel was lifted from the den, and there was not even a scratch on his body. His unwavering faith in God had miraculously saved him. He not only survived, but also came out stronger, reaffirming that God is sovereign even over the most deadly forces. The story, however, did not end with Daniel's deliverance. Darius, now fully aware of the plot against Daniel and the sovereignty of the God of Israel, ordered the conspirators to be thrown into the lion's den. Before they even reached the bottom, the lions devoured them, proving their ferocity had not been contained by chance. This outcome was not just a punishment for the conspirators, but also a public demonstration of God's justice. Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts emerging from a turbulent sea is as fascinating as it is enigmatic. Each beast, with its unique characteristics, represents an empire that would shape human history, revealing how the kingdoms of the world arise, dominate, and eventually disappear under God's sovereign gaze. The first beast, a lion with eagle's wings, symbolized the Babylonian Empire. Its image was majestic, reflecting the power and glory of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar. The wings being torn off, however, show the king's humiliation and decline, who was forced to recognize that his power came from God. When the beast rises as a man and is given a human mind, it is a portrait of Nebuchadnezzar's restoration after his spiritual transformation. The second beast, a bear raised on one side, represented the Medo-Persian Empire. This bear, with 3 ribs in its mouth, was an unstoppable force, conquering nations like Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. Its image reflects the brutal and expansionist dominance of this empire, marked by immense and lasting conquests. The third beast, a leopard with wings and several heads, was a figure of agility and lethal strength. It represented the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great, known for its rapid and comprehensive conquests. The division of the leopard into several heads symbolized the fragmentation of Alexander's empire after his death, when his empire was divided among his generals. The fourth beast was the most terrifying. With iron teeth and 10 horns, it symbolized the Roman Empire, a crushing and relentless power. Its frightening description reflects the brutality and military effectiveness of Rome. The small horn that emerges among the 10, destroying 3 others, highlights a specific leader who would challenge God and persecute the saints. This figure is often associated with the Antichrist, whose appearance is linked to the events of the last days. The vision does not end with the beast's dominion. Daniel sees the Ancient of Days, a glorious image of God, taking the throne to judge. The Son of Man is presented, receiving an eternal kingdom, bringing hope for redemption and divine restoration. This final image reminds us that regardless of the power of human kingdoms, it is God who sovereignly rules. The vision of the ram and the goat is equally powerful and detailed, providing a clear window into the conflicts that shaped ancient history. Daniel saw a ram with 2 horns, one larger than the other, dominating the scene. This ram was the Medo-Persian Empire, with its strength concentrated in Persian leadership. Its ability to conquer in all directions symbolized the relentless expansion of this empire. The scene changes dramatically when a goat appears, moving quickly from the west, so fast that it seemed not to touch the ground. This goat was the Greek Empire, led by Alexander the Great. The large horn between the goat's eyes symbolized Alexander, whose strength and speed of conquest were unprecedented. However, the horn is broken, reflecting Alexander's early death and the subsequent collapse of his dynasty. In its place, 4 small horns arise, representing the division of Alexander's empire among his generals. From one of these horns, a smaller horn grows, gaining power and audacity. This small horn symbolized Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a Seleucid ruler who stood out for his brutal persecution of the Jewish people and the desecration of the temple in Jerusalem. He sacrificed unclean animals on the altar and prohibited Jewish practices, sparking fierce resistance that culminated in the Maccabean revolt. The vision of the ram and the goat, though human kingdoms may seem dominant, their power is limited and temporary. God is in control, allowing these kingdoms to flourish only until they fulfill his purpose. The prophecy of Daniel's 70 weeks is perhaps one of the most significant and detailed in the entire Bible. After studying Jeremiah's scriptures, Daniel realized that the Babylonian captivity was nearing its end. He began to pray fervently, confessing Israel's sins and seeking God's mercy. The response came in an extraordinary way. The angel Gabriel appeared, revealing that God had a much greater plan for Israel and the world. The 70 weeks, or 490 years, would be divided into specific periods, each marking crucial events in the history of redemption. The first period, 7 weeks, began with the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Despite difficulties, the city and temple were restored. The second period, 62 weeks, led to the coming of the Messiah. This period culminated in Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, a significant moment in the history of salvation. However, the Messiah would be cut off, a clear reference to Christ's crucifixion. This event, though tragic, was central to God's plan to redeem humanity. The final week, often associated with the events of the end times, involves a covenant that will be made and broken by the Antichrist, culminating in a great tribulation. During this period, the temple will be desecrated again, but God's judgment will be poured out on the wicked ruler, bringing about the end of times and the establishment of the eternal kingdom. This prophecy also pointed to Christ's coming and the end of times, affirming that God is in control of history from beginning to end. Daniel's vision of the conflict between the North and the South, described in chapter 11, is one of the Bible's most detailed and complex accounts of historical and spiritual events. It reveals political intrigues, unstable alliances, and betrayals that shaped the ancient world, and points to a future where these dynamics will intensify before the final conclusion of human history. Daniel received this vision during the reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, but the events described span centuries. The nations represented as the North and the South are historically related to the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Egypt, which emerged after the division of Alexander the Great's empire. The Holy Land, situated between these powers, became a stage for constant conflicts. The text details a series of political intrigues. Kings of the North and South engage in marital alliances to consolidate power, but these alliances often end in betrayal. A notable example is the marriage between the daughter of a king of the South, Berenice, and the king of the North, Antiochus II. Despite the alliance, internal conflicts and conspiracies led to tragedy and war. One of the most notorious figures in this prophecy is Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a Seleucid king known for his cruelty and arrogance. He desecrated the temple in Jerusalem, sacrificing a pig on the altar and banning Jewish practices. This event, known as the Abomination of Desolation, is a landmark of Jewish suffering and prefigures apocalyptic events mentioned in other parts of the Bible. However, the conflict between the North and South is not limited to the past. Many scholars believe this prophecy also points to a future confrontation between global powers, culminating in end-time events. Just as the Holy Land was caught in the crossfire of ancient kingdoms, humanity will be challenged to choose between the forces of the world and the kingdom of God. Daniel's final vision, recorded in chapters 11 and 12, is a synthesis of hope and warning. While Daniel sees a future marked by unprecedented tribulations, he also receives promises of redemption and victory for God's people. This vision transports us to the conclusion of history, where the cosmic conflict between good and evil will finally be resolved. The vision begins with a description of historical events leading to the rise of an evil ruler, often associated with the Antichrist. This leader, described as an arrogant man who exalts himself above all gods, will be an oppressor of global proportions. He will establish deceitful alliances, bring destruction, and directly challenge divine authority. The time of the end is described as a period of great tribulation, such as has never been since nations existed. It will be a time of extreme suffering, but also of divine intervention. The Archangel Michael, the protector of God's people, will arise to fight for the righteous, ensuring their deliverance. This final conflict is not only physical, but also spiritual, highlighting the battle between the forces of heaven and hell. One of the most remarkable elements of this vision is the promise of resurrection. Daniel sees that many who sleep in the dust of the earth will awaken, some to everlasting life and others to shame and everlasting contempt. This is one of the Bible's earliest explicit mentions of resurrection, offering a clear view of final judgment and divine justice. However, Daniel is also instructed to seal the words of the prophecy, indicating that the full understanding of these events is reserved for the last days. He is encouraged to rest in peace, with the assurance that at the end of times he will rise to receive his inheritance, Are you prepared to trust God even when times seem dark? The stories of Daniel challenge us to reflect on how we face difficulties and where we place our hope. Remember, Daniel remained faithful even amid the greatest adversities, and God used his faithfulness to change the course of history. If you want to learn more about biblical stories, watch the video linked on the card on the screen. Leave in the comments what stood out to you most in this series of visions, and share how you are applying these lessons in your life. And of course, don't forget to like this content and follow the channel to continue exploring the stories and mysteries of the Bible. Though times may seem difficult, God is sovereign, and the end of the story is already written. Let us walk the path of faith together, knowing that, like Daniel, we can be a light in a world full of darkness. Until the next video, the journey continues.